Hi, everybody. I hope you're all having a great fall so far. And today we're going to be talking about home care Medicaid. So just my early disclaimer is that this is meant to be for educational purposes and not legal advice. I say that, one, because I'm a lawyer and I have to say it, but also because it's really important that you go and get specialized and personalized advice on these issues. So the things I'm going to be talking about today are going to be explaining what the rules are, but there's always exceptions to the rules, and there's always ways that your situation could fit into the rules that you might not imagine or we might not be discussing on this webinar. So please take this information as education and go and get some personalized advice from an elder law attorney that practices in your area as to how this could apply for you or your loved one that you're concerned about. Also, I want to add that everything that I'm going to be discussing today is New York State specific. Medicaid is a federal and state program, and New York State has a budget that allows for certain eligibility rules for Medicaid, and that is not going to apply in other states. Many things that we can do to get people home care Medicaid in New York can't be done in most other states. So if you are looking for services in a state other than New York, again, it's even more important that you get local advice. So all that being said, what is Medicaid? So Medicaid is health insurance. At its base level, that's what it is. And when we're talking about the Medicaid we're going to talk about today, we're talking about long-term care Medicaid, community-based services that are for long-term purposes. Many of the clients that we're assisting in getting these services are what we call dual eligible, meaning that Medicare is their primary insurance and they're eligible for that, and they are also eligible for Medicaid services. So you don't lose your Medicare services when you apply for community-based long-term care Medicaid. You are just adding on another layer of insurance. So if you have Medicare covering your hospitals, your doctors, all of that, your prescriptions, that will remain the same, but we'll be adding on this Medicaid layer to pay for things, most importantly, home health services, a home health aide to come to your home and assist you with activities of daily living. Unlike Medicare, Medicaid has certain asset and income limits in order to qualify, and we're going to talk about those things today. There's also certain requirements as to the level of care and assistance that you need, that you have to hit a certain level in order to qualify. And that's something that's changing in the law right now. So we're going to go through that today as well. While we are talking about community-based care, people always ask me, what about that 5-year look back? So before we get into community-based care, I want to briefly touch on Medicaid that we refer to as chronic or institutional Medicaid. That is when you're looking for Medicaid to pay for a long-term stay in a skilled nursing facility, in a nursing home. So very often people will fall or have some sort of incident that takes them to the hospital. After a few days in the hospital, they'll then move to be a Medicare rehab patient in a rehabilitation facility. And then sometimes if they're unable to come back home, they will stay long-term in that or a similar facility. And that's where skilled nursing comes in. And you'd either be private pay at that point because Medicare doesn't cover that, or you'd look for Medicaid to cover those services. That is where there's a 5-year look back. So what that means is from the date that you're asking Medicaid to cover your stay in that skilled nursing facility, they go back 5 years from that date, and they look to see what assets you have given away during those 5 years for less than fair market value, so gifts. And what have you given away in 5 years? And then for every $13,000 and change, and it depends on what county you're in, but around $13,000 that you give away, that's a 1-month penalty. So the monetary amount of the penalty is going to be different for everyone because the penalty is going to equal 1 month of private pay in the specific facility that that person is in. So let's say that over the course of 5 years, you gave away $26,000. That's about 2 months penalty. So if you're going to have to pay privately for your care for 2 months, that could be anywhere from, depending on where you live, downstate $15,000 to $20,000 a month, give or take. and you'll pay that for 2 months, and then Medicaid would pick up and cover. But obviously, if you did some big planning, like putting a home into an irrevocable trust or giving away large amounts of assets, now your penalty is going to be very large. And so the important thing to know is that there is a 5-year look back for nursing home Medicaid. And if you find yourself or your loved one in a position where you need a nursing facility, but you didn't plan 5 years in advance, you should seek the advice of an attorney if you have assets to protect, because there's usually something that can be done to protect at least a portion of those assets. So again, while that's not the topic we're going to really be discussing today, I think it's important to note because many people get confused about that 5-year look back and if it applies in the home care setting. It does not. So we're going to talk about the current rule and the potential changes in the home care setting. But as of right now, today, if you apply for Medicaid, there is no look back. So what that means is that if you're looking to be eligible on October 1st, which is just a few days away, as long as your assets are out of your name before October 1st, so by close of business on the 30th, you have less than $15,900 in assets, then you can be eligible for October 1st. And so there's a lot of people say there's a 1-month look back or a 3-month look back. There is no look back. So as long as your assets were transferred before the 1st of the month in which you're looking to apply, you are eligible in that month. So it's very important to remember. So when we talk about home care services, what are we talking about, right? What are we doing all this planning for? What are we trying to get? What we're trying to get are home care services, a home health aide, a licensed home health aide to assist with activities of daily living. That's what we're looking for here. Now, the current threshold under the law that has been is that as long as you need more than 120 days of care, you can receive managed long-term care services or community-based long-term care services through the Medicaid program. The new law, which was signed into the law in April of 2020 as part of the governor's budget, but they've been working on creating the regulations. And we just found out last week that those regulations have been set and are set to go into effect on November 8th of this year. However, they won't go into effect on November 8th, and I'll talk about that. But starting on that date when they go into effect, the 120-day rule will no longer be the rule. Now, in order to get community-based long-term care services, you will need to show that you need physical assistance with 3 or more activities of daily living. So 3 or more activities of daily living, physical assistance. The only exception to that is that if you have a diagnosis of any type of dementia or Alzheimer's, then you only need 2 or more ADLs that you need assistance with, and that can include supervisory assistance. So this is a big change. And so a lot of people are used to this ADL requirement in the private long-term care sector, where you have to meet a certain level of activities of daily living that you need assistance with in order to receive private long-term care. But now we're seeing that in the Medicaid setting. And there's a lot of people that are very upset about this, the lower level of care only being for dementia or Alzheimer's, because there's many people with cognitive impairments that need supervisory assistance that don't fall into that category. And so we can expect to see a lot of challenges coming to that law down the line. Now, I said it goes into effect on November 8th. That is the date that it's set to go into effect, but it can't actually go into place until the new set of assessments is set up. So basically, there's going to be an independent physician who will look at the case. For certain high-level cases, more than 12 hours a day, there'll be a certain independent review panel. And until those services are created and those teams are put together, this can't go into effect. So we know that it won't be sooner than November 8th, but we're pretty certain it won't be on November 8th that it goes into effect, because they won't have the time to get those services in place. And so we're going to wait and see when that actually comes into play. But this will be the new rule sometime soon. So that's what Medicaid is going to provide. It's going to provide those home care services. There are other things that Medicaid, community-based long-term care, provides: transportation to doctor's appointments, certain other items that your other insurances aren't covering. But mostly people do this in order to receive the home care services that they need in order to remain in their home. So an important thing to note when we discuss that is there's eligibility, which we're going to talk about, that gets you financially eligible. Then there's these assessments, which are about to change to determine how many hours of care you will receive. They might say you receive 8 hours a day or 24/7, but then there's staffing. And the issue has become in many places that staffing is a really big problem. So let's say you live in a more remote place, like the East End of Long Island or some other part of the country where there's not great public transportation, it's not heavily populated with workers. You might have the issue where you're approved for a certain level of care, but you can't actually fill those hours. You can't find someone to work those hours. That becomes the problem. And while that was never a problem in a place like New York City, we're seeing it a problem here too, because especially with COVID, there are a lot of people who are not wanting to be vulnerable and go into other people's homes. So there's less workers because of that. And now, as of October 7th, all home care workers are mandated to be vaccinated, all licensed home care workers. So that's going to be another pressure on the system. If there are home care workers who don't want to be vaccinated, they're not going to be able to work in the homes under their agency. And so I think we can expect to see some more staffing issues down the line. So that's what it gets you. But how do you become eligible? So there's the asset limit, $15,900. That does not include retirement accounts. So let's say somebody has a checking account that's underneath that limit, but they have $100,000 in an IRA. That's okay. That person will still be eligible because that IRA does not count as an asset as long as they're taking distributions on that IRA. And that counts then as income, which is a separate test for Medicaid. But as long as they are otherwise underneath that limit, aside from the retirement accounts, that's going to be okay. Some things that people don't realize count as an asset is if you have life insurance with a cash value. So say you have a whole life insurance policy and it's only a $15,000 death benefit, but you've got a cash value that's built up. As long as the Medicaid applicant is still the owner of that policy, that asset is considered available to them and therefore goes towards the $15,900. So that's something you want to keep in mind. Who owns the cash value of the life insurance? Non-qualified annuities, meaning annuities that you've purchased with post-tax money, unlike the retirement, which is still taxed on the distributions, those count. Also 529 plans. So if I own a 529 plan for my grandchild and that has $30,000 in it, that is my $30,000 for Medicaid purposes. So you want to keep that in mind as well when looking for eligibility, that a 529 plan does count as an asset. Your home, your primary residence doesn't count as long as it's underneath the Medicaid equity limit. But there's going to be issues after your death if that home passes through probate. So while a home, your primary residence, doesn't count as an asset if it's under the equity limit for eligibility, we still want to do planning with that home. And that's something that, that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. Okay. I see there's some questions, but I'm going to move through because I may answer some of your questions and then we can go back at the end and answer all questions. So how do we protect your income, right? So someone has, I'm going to show an example on the screen. Okay, so let's say this is an example of someone's income. They have Social Security coming in, and these are gross amounts. Medicaid goes off the gross. Social Security, a pension, retirement. So that IRA that they had has a distribution of $275 per month. And dividends. Let's say they have an investment account that they put in a trust years ago and they can't access the account, but they can access the income. So they get $80 a month there. That's their total income added up there. We subtract their premiums for health insurance. So their Part B, the Part B and the Medicare supplement should be swapped on this. The Part B is the $148.50 and the supplement is $300. They're allowed to have $904 a month. So their excess is $1,467.50. So what does this mean? So Medicaid says you're only allowed $904 worth of income. Plus you can pay your health insurance premiums. But many people can't live on that $904 a month. So that excess income can be protected for their benefit. So how is the question, right? So every month, the income, all those 4 pieces of income will come into the checking account. 904 will stay in the checking account. And the excess that's listed here will go to what's called a pooled income trust, POOLED. A pooled income trust is a type of supplemental needs trust that's administered and run by a charity that is meant for people on government benefits to take their excess income and use it to pay their bills. So if you've got $1,467.50 going into your pool trust every month, there'll be a small administrative fee for the trust. And then you can submit bills to the trust and they'll pay your bills, your rent, your maintenance, your mortgage, your taxes, your utility bills, your food bills, clothing, anything for the benefit of the Medicaid applicant can be paid with this money. So you've got your 904 in your bank account that you can spend however you'd like. And then you've got your 1,467.50 in your pool trust that you can spend. So this is a typical way that we protect income so people can stay at home. Now, what I want to point out is that that excess income will accumulate from month to month. So I have clients who maybe in the first month, they only spent $1,000. And in the second month, they spent $1,200. So that little extra has accumulated each month. That's okay, it will accumulate in the trust, but upon your death, that goes away immediately. It can no longer pay bills once you're deceased. And so you want to use this money every month to the best of your ability because it can't be saved. So that's how we share, how we protect income in New York in terms of home care Medicaid. When I talk about the distribution from the retirement account, for some people, it will be the IRS required minimum distribution. And in some counties, based on your situation, it will be a higher distribution than that because Medicaid has their own chart for certain individuals. So you're going to have to see in your case which it is, but you can think about it as being what your required minimum distribution is or a little more. There's also spousal refusal in New York. So what that means is that the spouse of the Medicaid applicant can have more than $15,900 in their name and the spouse can still receive services. So let's take spouse 1 who needs to apply for Medicaid and spouse 2 who does not. Spouse 1 can only have $15,900, but spouse 2 can have up to about $130,000. And that is the spousal limit. Now, in New York City, if a spouse has more than the $130,000, the city can seek reimbursement from them or seek contribution from the spouse for care. That is the law in every county, although the Long Island counties, we know, do not seek contribution from the spouse. They can, but they don't at this time. But that's what spousal refusal means. It means you can have assets above and beyond the Medicaid limit and have the Medicaid recipient spouse still receive their care. Now, what might change? So back in April 2020, when that law was changed about the level of care and how people are assessed for care, the other thing that was changed was that there was a 2.5-year look back put on community Medicaid eligibility, 30 months. So what that would mean is once you apply for care, they would go back 2.5 years and see what you gave away, and then there would create a penalty. Now, that went into law, but New York State does not yet have the approval from the federal government, from CMS, to make that go forward. So as of today, as I said before, there is no look back for community Medicaid. We've recently been told by the New York State Department of Health that there will not be a look back for community Medicaid until at least July 1 of 2022. And even then, we don't know if it will go into effect because we don't know if we'll have that federal approval. So right now we're operating as there's no look back. However, in the future, there may be one. And so you'll have to check back in for updates on that. In any case, the look back will only go back to October 1st of 2020, the original implementation date that was listed in the law. So if you apply for services, but you transferred assets in September of 2020, you're grandfathered in to there not being a look back on those transfer of assets. But anything you transferred subsequently, once that law goes into effect, could create a penalty period unless you fall into one of the exceptions. So what can you do to plan, right? What can we do to make sure that down the line, if you do need community Medicaid services, you can get the care you need? So one is having strong estate planning documents, including healthcare proxy and power of attorney. The healthcare proxy says who makes medical decisions and has access to medical information if you can't do so for yourself. And the power of attorney talks about financials. So let's say you get to a point where you need to be doing planning for community-based long-term care Medicaid, but you don't have the assets put in the right place. You obviously wouldn't yet have a pooled income trust set up, and you need somebody to do that for you because you can't do it for yourself. You need to make sure that the power of attorney document that you have allows your agent to do all those things on your behalf, especially create the pooled income trust, because you will be rejected from Medicaid if your agent needs to do that for you and they don't have the power. So it's important that your agent have that power. Now, for the power of attorney, I want to point out that there's a new power of attorney law that went into effect on June 13th of 2021 of this year. So as of June 13th, any power of attorney signed after that date needs to be under the new form under the new law. Prior powers of attorney will be grandfathered in and will be deemed valid as long as they were fully executed under the law that existed at the time that it was signed. And so now is a good time to have your power of attorney reviewed to make sure that there aren't any changes necessary based on this change in law. But that power of attorney, one way or the other, is going to be a very big key to getting these services if you're not able to execute the financial end of it on your own. You also might want to create an irrevocable trust for the purpose of putting your home, maybe that life insurance that has cash value, and maybe some other assets. Now, it's important to note that if you put assets into the irrevocable trust, you don't have access to those assets for your benefit. You only have access to the principal. So you can make family members beneficiaries while you're alive, and family members that are not your spouse can be beneficiaries while you're alive, but you don't have access to the principal of that trust and it can't be used for you. So it's a certain level of planning that you can do, but you need to feel comfortable that you don't need those assets. But certainly putting your primary residence into a trust to avoid probate at your death avoids a Medicaid lien. Because remember, the home is exempt while it's your primary residence and you're receiving care in that home, but it won't be exempt from a Medicaid lien if it has to pass through probate if you own it in your sole name. The most important thing that I want to impress upon you again is that it's not one size fits all. There's planning for future Medicaid. There are times that people come to us when they're in crisis mode. There are services that we can get as a what we call immediate need Medicaid, which is more of a rushed process. But even still, that takes at best about a month to get in place. And so you want to make sure that you're trying to plan as far in advance as you can so that you have the documents in place and you have everything set up so that you don't hit up against the edge of the month in which you need care and you can't receive that care because the assets were not properly situated. So it's important to do this advanced planning and get this advanced advice so you understand what it would look like for you or your loved one to receive this community-based long-term care Medicaid. I'm going to go to the questions, and then once we're done with the questions that are here, I'm going to talk about the actual process of nursing assessments when you apply for care. I see there's some questions here. Liz, I'll just get started. So I see there's some questions here about the Cdpap program. So I want to describe what the Cdpap program is. So Cdpap is the Consumer Directed Personal Assistance Program. This is a program by which you can apply for Community Medicaid all the ways that I told you about. You would receive an award of hours. Let's say they were going to give you 6 hours a day of care. And then you can have someone who is not a licensed home health aide serve as your caregiver and be paid through the Medicaid program. This individual, again, doesn't have to be licensed. It's generally used for a family member, maybe a child or a neighbor or a cousin or somebody from your local church or synagogue who is coming in and helping, and it's becoming a job, and so they can be compensated for that job. That individual would sign up with a fiscal intermediary that would pay them. So Medicaid pays the fiscal intermediary, who then pays the individual, and they're issued a tax. They have to pay taxes on that income. So it is a taxable worker. But that is a great way to get your case staffed. When we talk about those issues that we have with staffing between COVID or being in a more secluded area, a lot of people use the Cdpap program to fill those hours that they can't find a home health agency that can find a traditional aid to fill. The other good thing about Cdpap is that because they're not a licensed home health aide, they can do things that a licensed aide can't do. For example, if you have to receive eye drops, that's considered administering medication, and a licensed home health care worker, home health aide, can't do that, whereas a Cdpap aide can, and other certain medical things that if trained properly, it's a great option for people. There was a question about if a domestic partner can serve as a Cdpap aide, and I believe they can, but I would have to go back and check the regulations on that one. Next question, there's also a question about filling in for a Cdpap aide that can't come in. And generally speaking, when people sign up for the Cdpap program, they not only have to have the caregivers that are going to act, but they often have to also have backup caregivers in play. And so it will have to be someone who's already signed up with the program because they have to be on payroll, et cetera. So that's who could fill in. Okay. So there was a question about if you can hire your own aide and get reimbursement from Medicaid. So you can't get reimbursement from Medicaid. You get hours from Medicaid. So like I said, you can hire your own aide or use someone who you have by having them sign up through this Cdpap program, and then they get paid the Medicaid rate through that program. Or in certain cases, if you have a licensed home health aide, you may be able to have the licensed home health agency that is paid by Medicaid hire your individual and work it that way. So that's going to be on a case-by-case basis. Now, if Medicaid will only give you 5 hours a day, but you want 8 hours a day, you can pay someone privately for the 3 hours that Medicaid is not covering. But Medicaid's not going to reimburse you. They're just going to pay the aid for what they do cover. There were questions about the Medicaid changes on October 1st. So that was October 1st of last year where we had all those crazy changes. And those are the things that I went through about the look back possibly happening, and then these changes to the care assessments and the level of care you can receive. But those, as I said, have new effective dates, and they're kind of a moving target that we're still watching. I'm gonna look at this next question. So it says, when will the 2020 changes in eligibility for personal care and Cdpap go into effect? So as I said, we believe that they will go into effect after November 8th, not on November 8th. And what's my confidence level they won't go into effect on November 8th? I feel pretty confident because as I've been told, they don't have the independent assessors set up or the independent review panel or the independent physician. So I feel confident, but I don't know how long after November 8th it will be. It's just a wait and see on that one. And the current eligibility standards, I think I went through, but I'll just repeat briefly. So right now it's that as long as you need more than 120 hours of care, 120 days of care, then you will be eligible for services. I just want to see. I think I answered all the questions that were under that one. Liz, I think one just got dismissed. Oh, here it is. Okay. Okay. Next question. So there's questions about the pooled income trust. What comes first, applying for benefits or getting the pooled income trust? So basically, if you apply, when you are going through the application process, that's when we determine whether or not you have excess income. And if you have excess income, you will set up the pooled income trust in conjunction or at the same time concurrently with applying for Medicaid. So someone said, if you don't get approved for the benefits, then you don't really need the pooled income trust. Unfortunately, it's true because we only find out how much care you're going to receive or if you're going to receive care after the eligibility process. You do have to set up the pooled income trust prior to getting that answer. However, you can set up the pooled income trust and you don't have to fund it immediately with your monthly amount until you start receiving services. And so if it's someone where we don't think that it's obvious that they're going to receive care, that might be the way to handle it. Someone asked about planning ahead with the pooled trust. No, you wouldn't plan ahead with the pooled trust. That's really only something that you're doing at the time that you're applying for Medicaid so that you can be eligible in terms of your income, but it's not something that you would do in advance. There's no benefit to you. In fact, because of the administrative fee to the trust, it wouldn't be advisable because you would lose that money for no reason on a monthly basis. What are the activities of daily living? I would have to go back to the statute to read the exact ones. I don't think I have them in my notes here because there was a big fight between what activities of daily living should be included, but there are things like bathing, toileting, grooming, dressing, walking. And I know with toileting, there was a big question of, is it the whole process or is it just transferring on and off of the toilet? So that's really a detail in the statute that we have to look at. Must long-term care insurance be used up before applying? That's a good question. So you must fully access your benefits before applying. In some cases, long-term care insurance is a small daily amount and it does not provide enough care. So let's say you have $100 a day of long-term care, but you need 24/7 assistance, which costs much more than that. You can max out your daily rate and have Medicaid pay on top of that. So it's not that the whole pool of money has to be used up for your long-term care, but you need to be maxing out your benefits before Medicaid will cover anything on a daily basis. Okay, so I've made it through the questions. I'm going to allow time for more questions to come in, and I'm just going to talk about the nursing assessments. So we get through the process where you apply for Medicaid, you set up that pooled income trust, and now we're at the point where you have to have the assessments to determine the level of care that you need. So what happens? There's a first assessment, which we call a conflict-free evaluation, and that's an assessment by which we determine if you meet that threshold level. So right now, the threshold is it a person who needs more than 120 days of care? The new threshold will be the ADL threshold I described. But the current rule is that that conflict-free assessment will happen to determine if you are eligible for services. And then in most cases, but there are limited exceptions, you'll have a managed long-term care plan, which you can think of as like the insurance plan for Medicaid. There'll be multiple plans that you can make appointments with, and they can come in and say, okay, we've gone through everything with you, and we believe that you need 6 hours a day of care 7 days a week, or 24/7, 7 days a week. Whatever it is that they believe you need, they will say, this is what we're offering you. You may have 2 different plans come in, and you'll go with whichever plan you think is going to provide more care or better care to you. Once you pick that plan, you enroll, and that becomes your Medicaid provider. As long as you enroll by the 20th of the month, services can start in the following month. So let me give you a timeline. Let's say we apply at the beginning of October. Technically, Medicaid has, if you're using a pooled income trust, especially, they have up to 90 days to determine your eligibility. We are finding that that's happening sooner than that, but let's talk long-term scenario. So October, November, let's say sometime at the end of December, you are told that you were financially approved. You have your conflict-free evaluation, and let's say by January 20th, you pick your managed long-term care plan. You've had both assessments and you know where you want to go. You sign the forms, you could start care by February 1st. However, if you get pushed back in that timeline and you don't decide which plan you want to go with until January 23rd, well, then your care is not going to start through that plan through Medicaid until March 1st. It will be kicked another month. So it's very important to pay attention to the dates when you're applying as it gets closer to when the decision is going to come in to determine what month you'll actually start that care. And then that managed long-term care plan provides your services. Part of the new law is that there will be, instead of twice a year to determine hours, they'll reassess on an annual basis, unless you reach out and say there's been a change in circumstances and I'm requesting a change in the level of care that I'm receiving. And then once you do request that, you'll have a response, and then you will have, once you get the response, yes or no on that request for changes, then there will be an appeal process you can follow if you disagree with the determination of the managed long-term care plan. I'm going to go back to these additional questions that I've written in. So please explain the monthly spending in the pool trust. So I'll put up my example again, because I think that might be helpful. Keep in mind, I just switched here the Part B and the Medicaid supplement. They're at the opposites here. But this is an example of somebody's income. So that $1,467.50 is going into the pooled income trust, and then bills will be submitted to the trust. Your mortgage, your rent, your maintenance, your credit card bill with food and clothing on it, anything for the benefit of the Medicaid applicant, your utilities, for example. And then once you have that in there, you'll spend that money. And at the end of the month, if there's money left over, it will hold over to the following month. And then the following month, that money will still be there. Plus your additional will come in, your new excess income, and it will accumulate. But at the time of your death, that money is gone. And so that's where you want to make sure that you're spending as much as you can so that there's not a loss. Okay, I see a question here. Are fair hearings still available, and are they in person or virtual? They are still happening. And right now, fair hearings are being held telephonically for the most part. And that's actually a demonstration program that went into effect in March of 2020 to see how many of these things can be held, fair hearings can be held virtually, and they've just extended it further. So that will continue to be a demonstration project. And they want to see how many they can keep telephonically to make it easier for individuals to appear at their hearing without going to social services and appearing in person. So the question is, for the 900 of income you can keep, can that money accumulate in the bank account even if you go over 15.9? Or do you have to make sure you're under 15.9 each month? So yes, you can accumulate the 904 every month in that account, but at the end of each calendar month, you must be back under the 15,900 to maintain eligibility for the following month. So if your income comes in and you go above the 15.9, that's okay, as long as in that same calendar month, you go back under the 15.9 before the end of the month, then you maintain your eligibility. And are the use of pool trusts at risk under the new proposed regulations? There is a potential for the pool trust excess, the amount not used at the end of the month, that could create an issue. Generally speaking, if you have a 2.5 year look back and you're transferring assets into a pool trust every month, the argument is that if you use that money fully every month, it's not a transfer that is not compensated. It's of equal value. I put money in and I used it on services for myself. The problem is a concern that the Department of Health sees, that money not used in a given month was transferred not for fair market value, and therefore is a transfer that could create a penalty. And that's something that the State Bar Association has been back and forth with the Department of Health about, and it's not settled as to how that will turn out. Part of that is because we don't know when or if the 2.5 year look back will go into effect. And so we have to wait and see what happens so that we can continue that conversation with the Department of Health. I think we have all the questions answered that are up. I'll give it a minute just to see if anyone else writes in. But I think we covered quite a bit today. I thank everyone for joining us. And as you can see, there's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of variables with the community-based long-term care program. And again, that personalized information and advice is going to be very important to making sure that you're covered or your loved one is covered the way that they should be. Please check back our website and our future webinars for updates to the program and to these implementation of changes and what's happening there. Thank you all, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.